So to start off our day, we have a really special, truly special treat. Thanks to the help of our platinum sponsors, Credit Suisse, we are fortunate to have Michael Mauboussin joining us today. And just to give you a little background, Michael Mauboussin is the Managing Director and Head of Global Financial Strategies at Credit Suisse. Prior to that, he was the Chief Investment Strategist at Legg Mason. And on top of these distinguished roles, Michael has written several remarkable books, which I'm actually trying to commit to memory, and including his recent bestseller, The Success Equation, Untangling Luck, Skill and Luck in Business, Sports, and Investing. Michael has been an adjunct professor of finance at Columbia Business School since 1993 and is on the faculty of the Heilbronn Center for Graham Endowed Investing. Now, some of you in the room may be just getting acquainted with Michael, but I have tried over the last number of years to read every brilliant word this man has written. And I've quoted Michael so often that for my birthday, the more comical members of my team actually gave me this picture frame with this picture. So when I come into the office every day and I look at my desk, right next to the pictures of my 4 adorable children and my beautiful wife sits a smiling Michael Mauboussin. So without any further ado, Michael, please join us.
Well, thank you, Mo, so much. I'm going to have to arrange for you to get some additional hobbies, I think. It's great to be with you. So we're going to open with a very fascinating topic of skill and luck. And before I get going, I have to tell you a story, which is a true one. Turns out the oldest national lottery in the world is that of Spain. It's been going continuously since the 1700s. The most coveted draw comes around Christmas. The country basically shuts down almost all Spaniards play. In the 1970s, there was a guy who was determined to buy a ticket that ended in the number 48. So he searches high and low, finds a ticket, buys it, and then he wins. So this is great. So a reporter turns to him and says, "Congratulations, I understand this number 48 was very important to you. Can you explain the significance?" The guy said, "Yeah, it's actually quite simple. I dreamed of the number 7 for 7 nights in a row, and 7 times 7 is 48. So even sometimes bad skill and good luck get you where you're going. So I'd like to cover 3 topics. First, I want to define skill and luck specifically, and then share what I call the 3 easy lessons. The relevance for investing should be quite clear. Second, I want to talk about the actual shapes of skill and luck, and then finally talk about what to do about all of this. So one way to think about the world is a continuum. On the far left, all luck, no skill, so roulette wheels and lotteries. On the far right, pure skill, no luck, maybe running races, chess would be over there. And we can array almost all activities in life between those 2 extremes. Now, defining terms is quite important. Let me just take a quick moment to do that. I'm going to define skill right out of the dictionary, which is the ability to apply one's knowledge readily in execution or performance. All right, so you know how to do something when you're called on to do it, you can deliver on cue. Now, luck, as you might imagine, is more difficult to define. It becomes part of moral philosophy quite quickly. But I'm going to say luck exists when 3 conditions are in place. Number 1, it operates on an individual organization, so it happens to you or your company. Second is it can be good or bad. I don't to mean suggest it's symmetrical, because it's not, but there's a plus sign and a minus sign. And third is it is reasonable to expect a different outcome could have occurred. So if we rewound the tape of time and we play it again, reasonable to expect a different outcome to occur. Those 3 conditions, you have luck. Now, what I've done here for fun is arrayed professional sports leagues based on 1 season of performance. So on the far right, that's where they actually fall. That's the NBA, Barclays Premier League Soccer, Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and the NHL. Now, I'm in Canada, so we have to talk a bit about hockey. In fact, I am still a beer league hockey player. I'm missing a game tonight, in fact, to be here today. I got a lot of heat about this from all of my hockey playing buddies, saying like, now what this doesn't say is that hockey players are not skillful, because we all know they're incredibly skillful. What this does say, however, is that the skill of the players is very close to one another, and then the skill basically offsets, and then much is left to luck. Now, let me just set this up very quickly, which is you might imagine taking from 2 distributions. So on the far left, luck distribution draws zeros from skill, so only luck matters. On the far right, a skill distribution, zeros from luck, so only skill matters. And almost everything in life is some mix of these two distributions. And with this little model sets up what I call the 3 easy lessons. So easy lesson number 1 is, whenever you observe an outlier, and almost all the outliers we observe are positive outliers, of course, because negative outliers die, literally or metaphorically. But when you see a positive outlier, it must be great skill plus great luck. And if you think about it for a moment, that has to be true. Now, one example is baseball. Joe DiMaggio hitting 56 straight games in 1941. His career batting average was .325. If you look at all the players with 30 or more hitting streaks, their career batting average is over 300. So saying it differently, not all the skillful players have streaks, but all the streaks are held by skillful players, right? Because skill is a prerequisite, and then luck comes on top. Both elements must be present. Second observation is on reversion toward the mean. Now, I talked to an investment group and everybody reverts mean. Everybody shakes their head, vigorously. Yes, we understand that. But if you observe the behavior of investors, of course, they don't act as if they understand reversion to the mean. Technically, what it says is this: outcomes that are far from average will be followed by outcomes with an expected value closer to the average. Right? The canonical example, which we all learned in our stats class, is the height of fathers and sons. Very tall fathers have tall sons, but the height of sons is closer to the average of all the sons. And likewise, short fathers, short sons, but again, the heights of the sons closer to the average of all the sons. Now, here's the thing I want to leave with you on this, is it turns out where you lie in the luck skill continuum defines the rate of reversion to the mean. If you're on the pure luck side, you should expect complete reversion to the mean. So the expected value of the next outcome is some measure of the average. And if you're on the pure skill side, there is no reversion to the mean at all. We run a sprint against Usain Bolt, he wins. We run again, he wins again. No reversion to the mean. So this is a very, very useful analytical tool that you can apply to almost every aspect of the world of business, sports, and investing. Now, the last thing I want to say, the last lesson is probably the thing that's garnered the most interest from the book. It's an idea I call the paradox of skill. I want to be clear that it's not my idea, but I gave it that name. The paradox says in activities where both skill and luck contribute to outcomes, it is often the case that as skill improves, luck becomes more important. So how does more skill lead to more luck? So I learned about this from a very eminent biologist named Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote about evolutionary theory and also liked to write about baseball. My favorite essay is one about Ted Williams, last player to hit over 400 Major League Baseball. Question is, why has no one been able to replicate that feat? And Gould entertains and dismisses a number of alternatives. He ends up saying, basically, the answer is that the quality of the players has become more uniform. So saying it differently, more technically, the standard deviation of skill has gone down. And if you accept that batting average is some skill plus some luck, even if the standard deviation of luck has stayed the same, if the standard deviation of skill has gone down, so too will standard deviation in batting average. And that is precisely what we've seen. So the standard deviation of batting average in the 1940s was 0.032. Standard deviation of batting average today is 0.027. Right, saying this very differently and much more technically, Ted Williams was a 4 standard deviation positive event. And if you were a 4 standard deviation positive event in 2011, 70 years later, you would hit 380. Now, 380 is obviously fantastic, but doesn't get you over that threshold. Now, for all those invested in the world of investing, hopefully this doesn't take a lot of transportation to carry over to the world of investing. What we are also seeing in the world of investing in mutual funds, in hedge funds, is the standard deviation of skill is going down because people have access to the same information, same computers, same bright graduate students, the same academic papers. So we're seeing the same thing happen in the world of investing. Even though skill is absolutely never higher, it is relatively narrower than before, and because it's a competitive game, that shows up as luck being more important. So as I leave this slide, I want to impress that thought on you. Absolute skill never higher, relative skill never lower, and more being left to luck. Now, let me turn to the second thing I'd like to discuss, which is the shape of skill and luck. I've been showing you these bell-shaped distributions. Of course, you know that's not true. Let me start with a simpler case, and that is skill. Skill, not surprisingly, follows an arc. If you played athletics, you can totally relate to this. For instance, you start playing a sport when you're young. You're not very strong. You're not very proficient. As you get better, practiced, and stronger, you get to a peak level, and then you come down the other side. Now, by the way, one great way to predict this for athletes is slow twitch versus fast twitch muscle. Lots of fast twitch, you peak younger. More slow twitch, you peak older. So sprinters in their early 20s, hockey players, basketball players, mid-20s. runners, long-distance runners, certain other sports, late 20s. But pretty much that's it. Now, by the way, if you're a golfer, there's a little bit of good news. Golfers plateau around 30 to 35, and then they roll over. So there's our man, Tiger Woods, who I think is 38 years old now, and whatever else he's dealing with, now he's got Father Time knocking on his door. Okay. Now, you go, okay, that's kind of interesting, but what we care about is cognitive performance, right? We're in the brain business. Turns out that cognitive performance follows that same arc. Now, psychologists like to talk about two forms of intelligence. The first is, well, you can see, by the way, this is a bad news, good news situation right here. The first is fluid intelligence, which is your ability to deal with novelty. This is the bad news. Okay, so if I show you a sequence of things you've never seen before, how good are you finding what's going to happen next? Turns out that fluid intelligence peaks in your early 20s and pretty much goes downhill throughout life. So I think pretty much look around the room and safely say we're all on the downswing on that one, right? Now that's offset by the good news, which is fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, pardon me, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's your cumulative knowledge, your wisdom, understanding of facts, and barring cognitive impairment, that really grows throughout your life. So it's the combination that provides that gentle arc. Now, we're doing some research on this. There were a couple things that came out that were quite interesting. I'm going to ask you to participate with me on this. The first was, there's one research paper that studied the age at which institutional money managers generate, on average, the highest alpha, or the most alpha. The age at which institutional money managers generate the most alpha. Who wants to give me a guess on this? Open floor. Speak up, come on. 32. That's depressing, yeah? Anybody want to take an over or under on 32? Over, yes, thank you. Another number? 46? Over, under on 46? 50? Now you're getting warm. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so the answer to that came out to be 42 years old. 42. Now, there's a second number I found quite interesting, which was a study done by David Lapes and some of his colleagues at Harvard University on the age at which people make the best household finance decisions. So these are dozens of categories, things like at what age do you get the best terms on your mortgage? At what age do you get the best terms on your auto loans, credit cards, okay, so forth. All these household. So here's the second question I'll pose to you. At what age do you think people make the best household finance decisions? So this is not sophisticated people like you, but people in the real world. How do they do? What's the number? 42? That's not very imaginative. All right. It's not 42, but anyway, that's okay. No, upper, lower than 42? 60, thank you. Who said 60? Yeah, that's a good one. Higher than lower than 60? Higher? Who said higher? Yes, higher than 60? Because the answer to that came out to be 53. And I found that to be surprising because I'm more in this camp, right, which is on average 60-year-olds have more assets than 50-year-olds who have more assets than 40-year-olds, and usually 60-year-olds don't have issues with cognitive impairment and so forth. Why not 60-year-olds? Now, the cartoon version of this answer is that as we get older, we tend to get cognitively lazier. Okay? So I want to try to give you an example of this, and this is one I'm going to ask you not to, I'll solicit the answer at the right moment. Okay, so here's the setup, and there are no tricks. This is straightforward. Jack is looking at Anne. Anne is looking at George. Jack is married. George is unmarried. Here's the question I want you to answer. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? Right? Jack is married. He's looking at Anne. Anne is looking at George, who is unmarried. The question is a married person looking at an unmarried person? Three possibilities. A, yes. B, no. C, cannot be determined based on the information you've provided me. Which answer pops into your mind first? C. If you're in the C camp, please raise your hand. Be high, proud, okay. So of course that is the wrong answer, but thank you. Let me see if I can replicate the mindset of C, though, right? So you say, I have two pairs to work with. I said there was no trick. You have Jack and Anne. You know Jack's marital status. You don't know Anne's marital status, so you can't tell. The second pair is Anne and George. You know George's marital status, but you still don't know Anne's marital state, so you can't tell. Now, the correct answer, as you might divine, is A, yes. And the reason is Anne has only two possible marital states. She's either married or she's unmarried, right? And those are exhaustive. So let's assume for a moment that she's unmarried. Jack is looking at Anne. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? The answer would be yes. Now you flip her marital state and say she's married. Anna's looking at George. Is a married person an unmarried person? The answer would be yes, right? So no matter what you assume about our marital state, the answer must be affirmative. Now, I want to assure you, if I gave you all time, you all would have gotten this question correct. I promise you. But notice that C is the first answer that presents itself to all of us, right? And that's part of the trick here. The cartoon version of what happens as we get older is we tend to go with the first answer that comes to our mind more frequently. We tend not to check our work. So you tell your kids, check your work. We tend not to do that so we get cognitively lazier as we get older. And this is one of the consequences of this. Now let me turn to the topic of luck, which itself is fascinating. Now, when I talk about luck, there are going to be two very there's a bright dividing line between activities that are largely independent and activities that are path-dependent. And the path-dependent process is what happens before affects what happens next. And what I'm going to argue in a moment is in path-dependent processes, there's an inherent lack of predictability and an inherent inequality. But let me start with the simpler case, and that is the independent case. Now, we use in the book a baseball player, a guy named Adam Jones, who plays for the Baltimore Orioles. You can pick anybody. He hit 280 during one season, so we create a spinner model. It's in a computer, of course. We spinner model 28% of the time, hit 72% of the time out, simulate 10,000 times, and then we look at our statistical properties of our simulations versus the true Adam Jones, and it's close enough. Now, so I don't want to leave you with the impression that hitting is perfectly independent in baseball, because it's not. But for all intents and purposes, it's very, very close. And there are other processes in the world where the independence works pretty well. Now, the more interesting cases are these path-dependent processes. And it's very interesting. Earlier this year at my course at Columbia that Mo mentioned, that one of the people I had in was an executive from Time Warner. And in fact, of course, they have one of the largest film studios. I think it is the largest film studio in the world. And he must have said to my students 6 times, we have no reliable way to predict hits. We just don't know. We have a lot of incentive to figure this out. We know more with sequels and first runs, but we simply don't know how to predict hits. Let me share with you the results of one experiment that lend credence to this. This is an experiment called Music Lab, done by 3 sociologists at Columbia University. It was ostensibly about musical taste. Right? So you're a college kid sitting in your dorm room, you get this email and they say, we care about what you think about music. So you go into the site and there are 48 songs by unknown bands, and they're put up in random order. And then you're asked to listen to the songs and rate it 5 stars, I love it, 1 star, I hate it, and if you really like it, you can download it for your iPod. Right? That's the basic setup. Now, unbeknownst to these subjects, of which 14,000 participated, 20% went into what they called the independent condition. Right? The order of the songs is randomized, love it, hate it, download it, but you could see what no one else did before you. You're basically in the record store by yourself. The other 80% went into 10% each, 8 social worlds. Identical initial setup to the independent condition, but now you could see what others did before you. You could see what songs they downloaded and what songs they liked. In one extreme version, they had a leaderboard. And the question is, did what people do before you influence not only what you said you liked and what you actually did? And as you might imagine, the answer is unequivocally. Now, I want to be clear, the best songs in the independent condition had a much higher chance of success in the social world, so quality mattered. Bad songs really did well. But if you were in the top half, top quarter, pretty much anything would go. One song I thought captured this thing brilliantly. It was a song by a band named 52 Metro. It's called Lockdown. Number 26 in the independent condition, number 1 in one of the social worlds, and number 40 in another social world. So the point is, if we replayed the tape of time, would Madonna be Madonna, or U2 be U2, or Star Wars, or Harry Potter? And the answer is very unlikely. And this applies to a lot of the elements of business and certainly anything that's culturally driven. Now, the second thing I mentioned was inequality. And I want to share a story about this with a product named Stephen King. Now, what this is, a picture here is something that economists call convexity. On the x-axis, some measure of quality, skill, whatever you want to call it. Y-axis, some outcome, payoff, what have you. And what economists know is there's a convex function. So small changes in skill at the extreme lead to very differential payoffs. Great story about Stephen King. So he's obviously a very successful novelist. First book comes out in 1973. He's off and writing about a book a year with great commercial acclaim. It turns out, though, he's writing more than 1 book a year. So he's got these books piling up on the side. He turns to his editor and he says, hey, we're doing great. How about we do more than 1 book a year? And the editor says, Stephen, 1 book per author, per publisher. That's how we do it in our world. So he says, you know what, I'm going to go for it anyway. He started publishing under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. Richard, because there was a Richard Stark novel sitting on his desk at that moment, and Bachman, because Bachman-Turner Overdrive was playing on the radio. Any older people remember that song? You ain't seen nothing yet. Anyway, so Richard Bachman goes into business, and here's what happens for the next half dozen years. Stephen King, great commercial success. Richard Bachman, commercial flop. Stephen King, great commercial success. Richard Bachman, commercial flop. And this is going on and on. Early 1980s, there's a guy in a Washington, D.C. bookstore that reads this Richard Bachman book, last one he wrote, called Thinner, and he says, man, this guy sounds a lot like Stephen King. He writes like him, develops his character. This might be Stephen King. So motivated to go down to the Library of Congress, looks it up, and there it is. Stephen King owns the copyright. Calls him up. King comes clean, and now here's the part of the story that's fascinating. Turns out, from the moment it was revealed that book was written by Stephen King, not by Richard Bachman, sales went up 10x. 10x. Fascinating. Let me now wrap up with a couple final thoughts. Why do we struggle so much with understanding luck? So if I tell you the future has skill and luck, everybody here gets that. But once an event occurs, we all do the same thing, rapidly and effortlessly. As we create a narrative to explain that outcome, and then we file it in our minds. As we follow in our minds, two things happen. Number one is called hindsight bias, which is start to believe we knew it was going to happen with a greater probability than we actually did. And the second related concept is called creeping determinism. We start to believe that what happened was the only thing that could have happened. So you say, why do I have this weird picture of a brain in this guy? Well, it's maybe Baycrest. This sort of brain stuff is relevant, okay? Guy on the left is Michael Gazzaniga, a neuroscientist at UC Santa Barbara, most known for his work on split brain patients. These are patients with debilitating epilepsy, who have failed all their treatments. And as a last-ditch effort, they sever the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerves between the two hemispheres of the brain. Now, it relieves their symptoms, by the way, but also sets up this incredibly interesting experimental condition where researchers can feed information into the right hemisphere, which has no language, query the patient to do something, and then ask them why they're doing it. So let me be concrete. They show you a picture of a key into the left eye, goes into the right hemisphere. They say, point at the picture that makes the most sense. Guy points at a door. No problem. Now they say, why are you pointing at a door? Now notice your left hemisphere, it can talk, knows nothing of the key, but the person sees themselves pointing at a door. What it does, spontaneously, it creates a story based on complete gibberish. Just manufactures a story out of thin air. So much so they call this part of your brain the interpreter. And what the interpreter's charge is to create a cause for every effect it sees in the world. And in fact, people argue that's one of the key elements of humans, differentiating humans from other species. We have a module in our brains that closes cause and effect loops. Now, notice that this is a major problem because the interpreter knows nothing of luck. When people see good outcomes, they assume something good has happened, and when they see bad outcomes, they assume something bad has happened. So this is we're in a world where our brains are very poor at dealing with this, and yet we're confronting luck to a greater degree than we ever have. So I'll just make a couple I'll be very quick on this. What do you do about all this? If you're thinking about improving your skill, if it is something that has luck in it, a luck-laden activity, and investing certainly fills that bill, what you want to focus on is process. And process, I would argue, has three pieces: an analytical piece, a behavioral piece, and an organizational piece. But you must focus on process because outcomes are simply too misleading. And then finally, if you accept my definition of luck at the outset, there's no way to improve your luck. You know, people always have these aphorisms like, luck is where preparation meets opportunity, or the harder I work, the luckier I get. If you accept what I said before, it's really what's in your control versus what's out of your control. That said, there are some things you can do to manage your luck. And I'll give you just one example, the one on the left, which is if you're in a competitive interaction, and you're the stronger player, what you want to do is simplify the game so that your skill overwhelms that of your competitor. If you're the weaker player, what you want to do is complicate the game. Add battlefields, like metaphorically or literally, and that will dilute the strength of the stronger player. So with that, I will stop. I think we have just a minute or two. If anybody has any questions or comments or reactions, I think Mo, I don't know how we'll do this. I don't know how we do this exactly, but I'll stop there. Thank you. How do we best do this? Are there questions or? No, we're done. not going to ask a question. All right, we'll just call it a day. Oh, yes, we'll get back there. Yeah, I'll take one, yeah.
Someone has to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you.
Too long to write out. You made a very interesting comment that you can't predict the success of a song, of music. I've also read that about app development, for apps for, internet, various things. Why do you think, with the ability to predict so much, for example, the tremendous amount of time and money is spent to predict the success of a movie? They analyze every scene,
exactly.
the style of every scene to try to get the best, the best success. And Hollywood claims more or less they can do that. Why do you think we can't predict the success of a song or an app?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super fascinating question. I think that the way any diffusion of ideas happens is a propagation across a network. And what we know, even things like the spread of disease, for instance, those are very, very difficult to predict specifically because we don't know about all how the interactions work. So I would just say it's interesting, and you underscore a point. I think Mo talked about these other books. This is another key theme of some of the other books is, in certain realms, we can predict very accurately. Obviously, in some worlds, the physical worlds, physics, and so forth. But if it's a social realm, so if it's an economic outcome, a political outcome, or a social outcome, which is what you're really talking about, there are just too many variables for people to understand and map. So like you said, there are these extraordinary claims of people finding formulas for films, but to the best of my knowledge, that's not really been true. One of my favorite authors on this topic, who wrote a great book, is a guy named Duncan Watts, just as it sounds, W-A-T-T-S, and he wrote a book called Everything is Obvious Once You Know the Answer. And he talks a lot about this exact phenomenon, so I'd recommend his book. We have one more? Yeah. Can we do one more? Yeah.
If you believe that the stock market in the short term is a popularity contest and in the longer term is more like a scale that weighs things, which is a theory that I ascribe to, then investor sentiment would be a very important ingredient. So I was just wondering your opinion on investor sentiment right now, and how do you follow it? I see a lot of cross currents in investor sentiment right now, and personally, I cannot tell if we're bullish or bearish right now. What do you think?
Such a fascinating question. By the way, I have a piece coming out, but that quote, it's actually a quote is attributed to Ben Graham. So Mo mentioned Heilbron Center for Graham and Dodd Investing. That's the Graham of Ben Graham of Graham and Dodd Investing. And the quote I think is exactly, in the short term, the market's a voting machine. In the long term, it's a weighing machine. I actually don't like that quote that much. I don't think it's that helpful. But let me tell you, but I agree with your point about sentiment, right? So what that quote is saying to me is there are inefficiencies in the market in the short run, but ultimately the efficiency tends to win out. So that's the way I would recharacterize it. Okay, let me give the way I would answer this question, which is a quote from Seth Klarman, a really great money manager at Baupost Partners. And Klarman says, investing is at its core a marriage between a contrarian streak and a calculator. I love that, right? So the contrarian streak says when everybody believes one thing, I want to examine the other side of the issue carefully. Now, what's important is being a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian is a dumb idea, right? Because if this room catches on fire, by all means, you should run out the door, right? But that makes us introduce a second piece, which is the calculator, which is to say that view of everybody being on one side of the ship has led to a mispricing, right? So it's not just being a contrarian, but it's a mispricing. So, I mean, I'm not sure there are tons of obvious mispricings. I mean, it was, the markets themselves to be fairly reflect what's going on. But that to me is the framework I use. And I think it's consistent with your sentiment thing. But it's contrarian streak plus a calculator. Okay, with that, I think we're done. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the day.